Los Angeles was a city that thrived on secrets. The sun here didn't just shine, it seduced. It poured through the endless stretch of palm-lined streets, lighting up storefronts, Hollywood Hills, and bodies stretched out along the beaches. I'd lived in this city long enough to taste its honey and its venom. Long enough to know that behind every postcard-perfect sunset, L.A. hid stories that no one ever dared to tell. But nothing, none of it, had ever made my heart race the way he did. For years, my life had been painted in muted tones, safe and predictable. A beautiful home tucked away in the canyons, a steady marriage to Michael, my high school sweetheart turned businessman. He was steady, practical, the type who mapped out grocery lists and quarterly budgets with equal precision. He provided me with stability, routine, a life that many envied. And yet, somewhere between the charity galas and quiet evenings in front of the TV, something inside me began to hollow out. It wasn't dramatic, just subtle, like realizing one day you've been breathing shallow without noticing. Then came the idea, Michael's idea, to rent out the guest house behind our home. A little extra income never hurts, he had said with that calm, managerial tone of his. But I knew better. To me, that empty guest house felt like a waiting space, a blank canvas for something unexpected to walk through the door. And on a warm September afternoon, under skies so clear they almost looked artificial, something did. His name was Malik. The first time I saw him standing on our driveway, framed by sunlight and the sharp green of the garden hedges, I felt it, that unmistakable stir deep inside. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, like the city couldn't touch him, no matter how wild it got. I should have walked back inside, should have reminded myself of all the reasons I lived the life I did. But instead, I lingered on the porch a moment longer, heart beating faster than it had in years, as I watched him flash me a polite but disarming smile. "Mrs. Carson?" His voice was low, smooth, and velvety, like the slow roll of a jazz record at midnight. "Yes," I replied, suddenly aware of how warm the breeze had become. Los Angeles had always been a city of temptation, but that day it was standing right in front of me. I led Malik through the guest house, pretending to focus on the usual landlord spiel, explaining where the light switches were, how the water pressure sometimes fluctuated in the shower, the Wi-Fi password taped near the kitchen counter. But truthfully, my attention was fractured. Malik was younger than I'd expected, mid to late 20s maybe. His deep mahogany skin seemed to catch the afternoon sunlight, and there was a certain ease about him, a quiet, self-assured energy that made him seem older, wiser than his years. He moved like someone who knew exactly how to occupy space without demanding it. The type of man who could silence a room just by walking into it. "This is perfect," he said with a soft smile as he glanced around the room, his voice carrying that rich, warm tone that made my stomach flutter. I nodded, keeping my face composed. "It's quiet here," I replied, trying to keep the conversation professional. "Close enough to the city, but far enough from the chaos." He chuckled softly. "That's exactly what I was looking for." For the next few minutes, I listened as he told me about his recent move to L.A. The city still felt new to him, he said, like an unopened book with too many stories yet to unfold. He spoke about starting fresh, chasing something he hadn't quite named yet. His words were casual, but there was something behind them, something weightier. As we stood by the guest house window, overlooking the rose garden Michael and I had planted years ago, I noticed the way Malik's eyes flicked over the landscape, calm but calculated. "You've got a beautiful home," he said, glancing sideways at me. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a strange ripple of pride, but also something else, something unfamiliar. Malik signed the rental agreement that day, shaking my hand with a grip firm but gentle. As he walked back to his car to grab his things, I stood frozen on the porch, watching him disappear around the corner of the driveway. The breeze stirred the leaves of the lemon tree nearby, but all I could feel was the sudden electricity in the air. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I already knew. This was how stories began in LA quietly, beneath the surface, where no one else could see. The following weeks unfolded like a slow-burning fuse. Malik settled in quickly, polite and respectful, always flashing that disarming smile when we crossed paths. At the mailbox, by the garden, or when he'd jog past the porch during his evening runs. There was nothing overtly flirtatious about him. No teasing, no crossed lines. But still, there was something in the air every time he was near. I told myself it was harmless, that I was simply flattered by the attention of someone younger, someone who made me feel seen. Then came the night of the chandelier. The old guest house fixture had been flickering for weeks, but I'd always found excuses to ignore it. Michael was tied up with work again, neck-deep in quarterly reports and late-night conference calls, too busy to bother with loose wires and dusty bulbs. So, with the evening wrapped in warm, amber light and the hum of cicadas outside, I knocked on Malik's door. He answered quickly, dressed casually in sweatpants, his torso bare, skin glistening faintly from what must have been a workout. His presence, calm and effortless, filled the doorway. "Hey," I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I was wondering if you'd mind helping with the chandelier in the guest room. It's acting up." He smiled softly. "Of course." Minutes later, Malik stood on a ladder beneath the dim fixture. I watched from below, telling myself I was there to make sure he didn't fall. But the truth? My eyes had a mind of their own. His body moved with fluid grace, muscles tensing and flexing as he reached overhead. The soft sheen of sweat across his back caught the light in ways that made my thoughts wander somewhere they shouldn't. And then he caught me. Mid-reach, he glanced down, our eyes meeting. A small, knowing smirk curved his lips. My breath hitched, heart pounding so loud I feared he might hear it. But the moment passed in an instant. He finished adjusting the fixture, climbed down with ease, and wiped his hands on his jeans. "All set," he said, voice smooth as velvet. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you," I managed, my voice an octave lower than usual. Malik gave me a grin, the kind that settled somewhere deep inside me, then stretched his arms behind his head. And for one torturous second, I could barely stop myself from tracing every inch of him with my eyes. Later that night, lying next to Michael in our bedroom, I stared at the ceiling. The silence was deafening. My body buzzed with a restless energy I hadn't felt in years, and as much as I wanted to deny it, I knew something had shifted. Tomorrow, I would find out just how far. The next evening, the house felt too quiet, too still. Michael was away on business, a trip to visit clients in Northern California, just another part of his predictable routine. But tonight, predictability felt like a weight I couldn't carry. I stood in front of my mirror, watching as I adjusted the silk robe draped loosely around my frame. It was light, effortless, revealing just enough to suggest, but not enough to say too much. My heart thudded in anticipation as I padded quietly down the hallway, the soft glow of the house lights flickering against polished wood floors. I paused outside Malik's door, hand hovering midair before I knocked. A beat. Then another. The door swung open, and there he stood, sweatpants riding low on his hips, chest bare and glistening faintly under the soft overhead light. He looked relaxed, but the sharpness in his gaze betrayed something more alert beneath the surface. "Hey," I said, my tone casual but deliberate. "I was wondering if you might want some company." For a heartbeat, Malik's expression didn't change. Then, with the slow curve of a half-smile, he stepped aside. "Sure," he said quietly, voice like warm smoke. As I brushed past him, the fabric of my robe grazed his arm. His warmth, his scent, something masculine and distinctly his, wrapped around me like an invisible current. The guest house was quiet, save for the hum of the ceiling fan overhead. His laptop sat open on the desk, sneakers by the door. But it was Malik who filled the room. I turned, fingertips ghosting near the sash of my robe. "My husband's away. I said, voice soft but deliberate. Won't be back until tomorrow night. Malik's eyes darkened slightly, though his posture remained calm. He leaned back against the edge of his dresser, arms crossed over his chest, quietly watching me. I moved to the edge of the bed and sat down, knees brushing lightly against his. I guess I just felt a little lonely, I murmured, tracing lazy circles on his knee with one fingertip. His lips twitched, as though amused by my attempt at subtlety. Then, with a quiet laugh that rumbled deep in his chest, he reached out, hand closing gently but firmly around my wrist, halting my motions. His other hand settled on my waist, pulling me closer. The heat between us shifted, thick and undeniable. I froze for a moment, expecting him to wait, to tease, to let me steer this encounter like I always did. But Malik had no intention of waiting. The room contracted around us as his face inched closer, his breath fanning across my cheek. And then, his lips pressed firmly against mine, sure, deliberate, leaving no room for second-guessing. The power dynamic flipped in an instant, and for the first time in a long while, I surrendered. The kiss deepened quickly, no hesitation, no awkward pauses, just intensity, as though Malik had been holding back for far too long. His hand, still at my waist, tightened, pulling me flush against him as his other hand trailed up my spine with deliberate care. I melted into him, my fingers threading into his short-cropped hair, feeling the heat radiating from his skin. The silk robe slipped easily from one shoulder, and within seconds, his touch found the bare skin beneath. Malik didn't rush. He was measured, confident, as though every move had already been rehearsed in his mind. His lips traced the line of my jaw, down to the hollow of my throat, his breath warm and slow, as if savoring every inch. I let out a breathy sigh, arching slightly beneath the weight of his touch. The air around us felt thicker, charged with something unspoken, but undeniably real. I had thought I'd be in control tonight. I was wrong. Malik's dominance was effortless, yet commanding. There was no room left for teasing or pretense. As he pressed me back against the mattress, every nerve in my body came alive. His fingertips glided over the silk fabric of my robe, tugging it away with practiced ease. And I let him. I wanted to let him. There was no second-guessing anymore. No marital vows echoing in my mind. Just the heat of the room, the thrum of blood rushing in my ears, and Malik, the gravity pulling me deeper into something I couldn't stop. The night unraveled slowly, like a hypnotic rhythm, each touch more purposeful than the last. His control never wavered, patient, attentive, but charged with quiet power. And with every kiss, every breath stolen between whispers, I felt myself slipping further into a place I hadn't visited in years. By the time the city lights outside began to dim beneath the slow approach of dawn, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a fleeting misstep. This wasn't a fantasy I'd brush away in the morning. I had crossed a line, and somehow, in the quiet aftermath of tangled sheets and breathless silence, I already knew. I didn't want to go back. The morning light crept through the blinds in thin golden streaks, tracing soft patterns across Malik's bare back as he lay beside me. His breathing was slow, steady, untouched by the storm he had stirred inside me. I hadn't slept. Not really. My body still buzzed with energy, an aching, delicious tension I hadn't felt in years. I propped myself up on one elbow, quietly watching him. My fingers instinctively reached out, tracing the ridge of his spine, the smooth warmth of his skin beneath my touch. Malik stirred slightly, a subtle shift of his shoulders, but he didn't wake. I should have left. I should have gathered my robe and slipped quietly down the hall, back into the safety of my own bed before the morning sun made everything feel too real. But I stayed. As I lay there, I realized this wasn't just a mistake. It was something more dangerous. A craving. A hunger that went beyond the physical. It was the way Malik had handled me, the way he hadn't hesitated to take control, the way he had made me feel like I wasn't just a woman, but a secret he had already begun to unravel. Eventually, I slipped out of bed, tying my robe loosely around me. The apartment was quiet, but the air felt thick, heavy with the memory of last night. Throughout the day, I tried to busy myself. Emails, errands, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, but nothing dulled the pulse of anticipation building inside me. And by nightfall, I couldn't help myself. I stood outside Malik's door again, not bothering to hesitate this time. When he opened it, standing there shirtless and relaxed, that familiar smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, he didn't need to say a word. I stepped inside, brushing past him like a silent confession. And just like that, the rhythm began again. Bodies entwined, breath stolen, the air between us thick with heat and unsaid words. But this time, there was no teasing, no slow build. Malik lifted me effortlessly, pinning me to him with the same quiet dominance, and every part of me surrendered. I wasn't just slipping into an affair, I was falling into something far more dangerous. And as the hours blurred into one another, I realized I no longer cared. The nights blurred into each other like brushstrokes on a canvas, indistinguishable yet vivid. What started as a single reckless evening became a rhythm, intoxicating and unstoppable. I told myself it was just about the thrill, just about escaping the quiet, predictable life I shared with Michael. But every time Malik's hands found me, every time his lips pressed against mine with that unwavering confidence, it became harder to convince myself this was casual. I stopped sneaking away before sunrise. I started staying. There was something about the way Malik handled me, as if he knew exactly what I needed, sometimes before I even did. He wasn't like anyone else I had known. He didn't ask for permission, yet he respected me in a way that wasn't spoken but deeply felt. One night, as we lay tangled in his sheets, I found myself staring at the ceiling, breath still heavy from the hours before. Malik was beside me, eyes half closed but fully aware. He always was, watching without watching, feeling without speaking. I rolled onto my side to face him, and for the first time, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't leading this anymore. I was following the quiet dominance in his touch, the certainty in his gaze, the way he made me forget who I was outside these four walls. Malik shifted, his hand sliding across my bare waist, pulling me closer until our bodies fit seamlessly together. His presence was overwhelming, yet comforting, and when he whispered into the quiet, "Stay," it wasn't a question, it was a command. And I obeyed. The next morning, when the light filtered through the blinds, I was still there, curled against him, wrapped in his warmth. I didn't want to leave, but somewhere, buried beneath the waves of desire and control, I felt the distant echo of guilt knocking softly. I just wasn't ready to answer yet. It happened on a night like all the others, or so I thought. The apartment was quiet, the city humming softly beyond the window panes. I was sitting on the edge of Malik's bed, slipping my robe over bare shoulders, when his voice broke the silence behind me. "You don't have to keep sneaking out, you know," he said, voice low but steady. I turned to find him propped up on one elbow, eyes studying me in that way he always did. Calm, but deliberate. "I'm not sneaking," I replied, tightening the sash on my robe, though my voice sounded far too casual, even to my own ears. He chuckled softly, pushing himself up to sit beside me. "Then stay." 2 simple words, but they hit me harder than I expected. I hesitated, standing there as my heartbeat thundered in my chest. I'd always been the one controlling the pace, setting the boundaries, pretending this was nothing more than a game. But in that quiet moment, with the city's glow casting soft shadows across the room, the walls I had built so carefully started to crack. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and before I could stop myself, the truth tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. "I think I'm in love with you." The words hung between us like fragile glass, threatening to shatter at any second. Malik's expression shifted, though subtly. His eyes, once playful, now held something deeper. Surprise, maybe, or understanding. He leaned back slightly, exhaling a slow breath, his gaze never leaving mine. "Say that again," he said quietly, as if testing whether I really meant it. My throat tightened, my pulse raced, but there was no taking it back. "I'm in love with you," I whispered, voice trembling. And in that moment, as Malik sat across from me, calm but unreadable, I realized I had crossed more than just a physical line. I had crossed into something far more dangerous, something I might not be able to walk away from. The silence in the room stretched longer than I could bear. Malik's expression remained unreadable, composed, calm, but with something flickering behind his dark eyes. Was it caution? Was it power shifting again between us? I braced myself for rejection, for him to tell me I was imagining things, or worse, that this had all been nothing but a game. But instead, he leaned back slowly, eyes heavy with thought. "You don't do things halfway, do you?" he finally said, voice low. I swallowed hard. "Neither do you." His mouth curved into something between a smirk and something softer, more reflective. "You don't know what you're risking," he said. There was no accusation in his voice, only quiet certainty. And he was right. I didn't know what I was risking, not fully. I could feel the tremor beneath my skin, the slow unraveling of the life I had carefully built for years with Michael. A life of loyalty, routine, and stability. But there was no use denying it now. I had already tipped over the edge. "I don't care," I whispered, though the words tasted bittersweet on my tongue. "Not tonight." Malik reached for me then, his fingers grazing mine. The contact felt heavier now, more loaded than before. He wasn't smirking anymore. He was watching me carefully, measuring me. "Be sure," he said, voice softer now. But I wasn't sure, not really. I only knew what my body was craving, what my heart was shouting for in the dark. I knew that when I was with him, the hollow space inside me disappeared. Still, as I lay back beside him that night, with his breath warm against my skin, the reality pressed closer, heavier than the sheets that tangled around us. In the quiet stillness of the early morning, with Malik sleeping peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. How long could we keep this secret? And worse, did I even want to? The next morning, the apartment was bathed in soft golden light, the usual sounds of Los Angeles waking up, the hum of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, birds fluttering by the window, felt muted against the storm inside me. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. My silk robe clung loosely to my frame, my hair tousled, lips still tinged with the faint redness of Malik's kisses. But it was my eyes that gave me pause. They were wide, searching, questioning a future that had suddenly become unpredictable. What had I done? I touched the cool surface of the mirror, half expecting it to crack beneath the weight of the choices I had made. Part of me wanted to call Michael, to tell him everything, to beg for forgiveness for a mistake I hadn't intended to make. But another part of me, stronger, louder, wanted to go back to Malik's bed and get lost all over again. Later that day, while folding laundry and pretending to live a normal life, I heard the soft buzz of my phone. A text from Malik lit up the screen. "Malik, we need to talk tonight." My stomach flipped. The adrenaline that had powered me through nights of stolen moments now settled into something colder, uncertainty. Was he ending it? Or worse, was he about to pull me deeper? As I stood there in my quiet home, the city moving beyond my windows as if nothing had changed, I knew this wasn't just about temptation anymore. It was about choosing between two lives, one safe, familiar, and steady, and one that might burn everything to the ground. I wasn't ready to answer yet, but time was running out. That evening, as the city dimmed into twilight, I stood at the edge of two worlds. The quiet hum of Los Angeles beyond my window felt like a whisper, urging me to make a decision I wasn't ready to face. I never answered Malik's message. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, sank into the couch, and stared at the framed photos on the mantel. Pictures of Michael and me through the years, smiles from vacations, anniversaries, holidays we had once treasured. And yet, Malik's touch still lingered on my skin. His gaze, his voice, the magnetic pull that had unraveled me, it all clung to me like smoke. I realized then that no matter which path I chose, something had already shifted inside me. There was no undoing what had happened, no returning to the woman I was before. But perhaps that was the point. Whether I confessed everything to Michael, ran head first into Malik's arms, or chose a path entirely my own, I had already been changed. My heart, my desires, my sense of self had been cracked open. And sometimes, I thought, as I stared out into the glowing city skyline, the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, but between who you are and who you're meant to become. The night deepened, the silence stretched on, and the answer, whatever it was, would have to wait for tomorrow.